Welcome to our workshop on safely reopening our schools. We have a great panel ready for you to go, and we're going to be starting momentarily. I want to really, as we start, encourage everyone to please put questions into the questions tab in your browser window. We're going to be having a little bit of time at the end to submit some questions to our fantastic panel, and I'll be monitoring those as we go along. Our panel today will be Andrea Walker and Dr. Lee Kennedy from the NEA, the Center for Enterprise Strategy, and Chip Slavin, Chief Advocacy Officer for the NSBA. And they've done some significant work around collaborating in a crisis and how we really structure in a very real way the kinds of collaborative partnerships that are going to be so critical to reopening our schools. So again, welcome aboard. Thanks for joining this session. Please don't forget to submit questions in the questions tab, and I will go ahead and turn it over to you, Andrea.
Thank you so much, Glenn. It's great to be here with you all today. We have been watching and learning from the work of the participants in the California Labor Management Initiative for quite some time. And the National Labor Management Partnership is a coalition that includes the national associations for this country's educators, both the NEA and the AFT, the superintendents associations at the state and district levels, the National School Boards Association, and the National Associations for both the elementary and secondary school principals. This group recognizes that when our organizations and leaders work in partnership, it fosters a culture of authentic collaboration in schools and communities that has many significant and positive benefits for students and teaching and learning. And there are many examples of collaboration around this state as well as around the country at the school, worksite, and district levels and state levels. And at the national level, we see our role as to amplify, promote, and the good work that is happening across this country. And after seeing collaborative processes happen in places such as here in California, in 2018, the National Labor Management Partnership issued a call to action for collaboration, where we encouraged our leaders and members to get started and promote environments and systems for shared decision-making and shared responsibility. And now, in light of the recent pandemic, we understand that now, more than ever, those closest to the unique challenges that our communities face are the ones best suited to determine the solutions. So while each of our organizations individually has issued guidance for the what around the content of what needs to be addressed, related to the safe reopening of school buildings, the national group provided guidance on the how, the processes to safely reopen those school buildings. And we believe that those processes involve being in collaboration with each other to get the best results using many of the practices that are being shared throughout this conference. So we're really excited to be here. We are also fortunate to have one of our partners here today, Chip Slavin, a Chief Advocacy Officer from the National School Boards, who's going to say a few words on why NSBA supports the work of labor management collaboration and what they want the nation's school boards to know about it. Chip?
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with all of you today. I apologize, I'm calling from a telephone that's having a little bit of technical trouble today. But I'm very thrilled to be able to talk just very briefly for a minute or two about the partnership we have engaged with NEA and a number of other organizations that deal with management and labor issues, AASA, NASSP, NAESP, CCSSO, and AFT as well, all the acronyms. But we were very excited to be part of this initiative and this partnership, particularly with what's happening in schools as we look to reopen in the fall. And I'm just going to talk for a minute, and then you're going to hear more about some of the issues. But obviously, this is a very difficult time for school districts and school leaders preparing to reopen schools in the fall, like we all hope to do. And from the school board member perspective and NSBA's perspective, I will tell you that we think it's very important that people work together during this time, that there be a process to allow for a transparent decision-making and discussions about the best way to go forward. You know, whether there are a lot of things to consider, from the public health and safety issues to to school operations and logistics, to what teaching is going to look like as a blended learning and other options go forth, how we deal with equity and family and community needs, and finally how we deal with the social and emotional health of our students and our staffs. So it's incredibly important that we all come together during this time as much as we possibly can to make sure that every school that reopens, it's done so in a safe and healthy way, and in a way that allows for a healthy learning environment for students, so that they are able to pursue all their educational opportunities during this very unusual and tough time. I will just end by saying that while it is a difficult time, that I believe that this is a great opportunity for schools at the same time to deal with some emerging technologies and some emerging innovations. And hopefully we will have a safe reopening in the fall. But thank you again. Special thanks to NEA and to Andrea, who worked very hard on putting the document together we collaborated on. She helped lead the effort. And I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you guys briefly for a minute. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chip. We appreciate you joining us today. So after learning from the examples of labor management collaboration across the country in places like here in California, New Jersey, and Illinois, the NEA developed this framework that you see in front of you for collaboration that articulates a pathway and common processes that teams tend to go through from the very beginning of first becoming aware of the benefits of collaboration to the end of the cycle, where they're reflecting on their processes to help sustain and improve collaboration. And in one of the longest lasting examples of collaboration, ABC Unified, which is here in California, I'm sure many of you are familiar with them. Collaborative practices have been sustained for decades, even when new leaders come in and out of the system. You see that collaboration goes beyond a focus on individual relationships and deeply embedded practices in the system that transcends any one individual or personalities. And in doing so, they build a strong network that communicates their learnings both across and outside the district boundaries. And collaborative practices and structures, it's not a one-size-fits-all, and it's not one map to follow. It can and should look different in different places. But what we saw after examining many examples is that there are 3 stages that are common to most environments, and those are preparing to collaborate, acting or implementing collaboration, and then reflecting or continuously improving on collaboration. The steps within those phases are not necessarily done in a straight line. A team might jump around the steps, but it's helpful to think about the work of collaboration in 3 general phases of a life cycle: prepare, act, reflect. As I go through each of those phases real quickly, you may want to take a note to see where your team might be there, and feel free to tap it into the chat box where you think your team might fall now. So I also want you to know that this framework, as well as resources and tools for how to do each of them, can be found on NEA's website that we're going to share with you at the end of this presentation. There's a complete guidebook. In the prepare section, what you're doing is building the foundations for the partnership. You're learning the case for collaboration. You're figuring out who your partners are and need to be, how to collaborate with them, and approaching them to co-create shared goals. In the act phase, that's where you're doing the collaborative work. This is where you establish the teams and the groups that are needed to effectively collaborate across the district or school, determine the processes for collaboration, things like how to make decisions, how you're going to run your meetings, how do you address disagreements, those processes, and then the content you'll be working on. If your shared goals literacy, where are you going to start with that? What resources and expertise need to be involved? Then you work on your plan to address them and begin to implement the solutions that you co-create. The focus in the act section is on both what you are improving and how you do it together. And then finally, in the reflect stage, after you've completed your initiative, you reflect on your work and evaluate both the initiative and the processes that you've used, how well you did it together. And then you determine your next goal with an eye towards scaling up your success and sustaining your partnership. So you're here at this virtual conference, so you're already most likely on this collaboration journey. You came together likely for a specific purpose with a specific problem to solve or issue to address, and now you're somewhere along the way in these steps. So most likely, districts have been working on different goals, as have schools, but right now, we wanted to tackle a subject that is common to all: how to keep students and faculty safe as we attempt to reopen our school building. As I said before, there's a lot of guidance that has been written on this topic, whether it's our organizations or state governments, and it details the many issues that school systems must be mindful of. The CDC has issued health recommendations. There is a lot out there. And it's a lot on the shoulders of a superintendent to feel that he or she needs to make these decisions and be responsible for the outcomes alone. We believe that superintendents shouldn't even try to bear that burden alone, and that better solutions will come if they share in the decision-making with other education stakeholders so that the community owns the decisions together. So what would that look like? Well, we can use our framework in a modified version to address issues of the moment. And the NLMP document can help you think through what are the major issues to address within the topic of safe reopening of school buildings. So, in a crisis, you don't have the luxury of time to carefully and methodically think through every detail and step in the framework that I just shared with you. You feel the pressure to address the immediate needs at hand, and in the early stages of this pandemic, it was things as basic as food, shelter, and the safety needs, and you may find you're still addressing those right now. What you can do, though, is think about those three stages of prepare, act, and reflect, and pull out some of the key pieces. What we felt like it was helpful to understand the full framework and then to pull from it as we address this crisis moment. So in our time together today, we'll go over a modified version of that full framework and focus on the basics of both the content and the processes for collaborating in a crisis that you see here. So the first one there is the prepare section. So get your chat fingers ready to type in there. As you think through this slide, we want you to have an opportunity to share from your district and school who else needs to learn the case for collaboration and be included in your collaborative decision-making processes. During a crisis, the prepare phase is to determine who you can share the benefits of collaboration with and invite them to participate so that your decision-making processes reflect diverse viewpoints and address the unique needs of your community. This step is not only knowing the case for collaboration, but being able to reach out to other partners or your own members even to share the benefits in a compelling way. So this image represents some of the many partners who might need to be involved. And we assume that you already have a partnership in some form. That's why you're here, but it may not have all the stakeholders you'd want involved in the decisions about reopening schools. So why would you need to expand your partnerships? Well, because decisions about reopening schools are going to likely result in change. Things will feel different to parents and family, and change never comes without some resistance. It's hard. So if you haven't included people in your decision-making process, they're less likely to accept the needed changes within the solutions that are chosen. So who else might you need? Well, parents, perhaps through the PTA or other parent groups, community stakeholders, especially those who have helped your students and their families during COVID, and those who provide before school and after school services, perhaps local public health officials. Intentionally seek diverse viewpoints and your solutions will be smarter for it. A special tip for our association or union leaders, important to know, is that lasting collaboration that sticks is when your members are deeply engaged at all levels of the system. So you may know as a local leader the benefits of collaboration and maybe meeting with your administrators, but your members might need to know more about that and have them be ready to participate in the decision-making processes. So there are resources for how to share this case, again, on our website. It'll be at the end of this. We are excited to share them with all of you. It is for anyone in the system, not just for our members. What we have found most compelling in the case, in sharing the case for collaboration, stems from the Rubenstein-McCarthy research that shows labor management collaboration partnerships increase the percentage of students learning at or above grade levels, and that teacher retention rates, particularly in high poverty schools, rise. One union leader told us, once you hear that research, you can't unhear it, and you need to do something about it and start working together. And so we have videos with those research findings that you could just press play. We have infographics, and we have more. Next is the ACT section, where we'll be getting to the work of collaboration. And for the ACT stage, I will turn it over to Lee Kennedy from NEA as well.
Thank you, Andrea, and thank you everyone for joining us. As Andrea mentioned in the intro, the ACT stage is where the work happens. So in this stage, that's where you're putting your teams together, the people that are going to be participating in the solution building. You're clarifying what exactly the goal is and what you're hoping to accomplish together, defining what that content is, and also how you're going to be achieving the goals that you've set out. And then that results in plans that are then implemented. So let's dig in using the example that we've been using, reopening schools. We know that collaboration does not happen by magic. You need a container for shared decision-making to occur. And I assume because you've all, you're here and you're a part of CalMI, that you all have some form of a district leadership team in place. And maybe that's the entity that you want to use to tackle the issue of reopening schools. But as Andrea mentioned, you might not have all of the people involved in that team that you would want to tackle this particular issue. So it might be wise to create a crisis leadership team, although you might also want to name it something more positive than crisis leadership team. But at any rate, it would be smart to have a team there that is responsible for this particular goal. And as you think about school reopening, there's so much involved with that. That you may want to separate into working groups and not leave all of the decisions to that one body. So this graphic is also included in the National Labor Management Partnership document, and these are the suggested working groups. This may vary depending on what your context is. But we know that school systems are grappling with public health and safety. They're grappling with the logistics of what school is going to look like next year. There's teaching and learning issues. There's equity issues. There's social emotional health. So at a minimum, these are categories that made sense to us to try and tackle. And as Andrea mentioned before, the other benefit of breaking into working committees or working groups is that it spreads out your web of collaboration, right? Because this work is not just about a superintendent and a union president meeting and perhaps having a wonderful, productive relationship. This work is about collaboration broadly and shared decision-making among lots of stakeholders. And so the more working committees you have tackling different issues, the more opportunities you have for the average rank and file educator or parent or community member to really play a part in building the solutions that your community needs. So the next step is to clarify your goals and objectives and dig into the content that you're going to be working on. And in a crisis, we already know what the goal is. The goal here is safely reopening school buildings. And the crisis leadership team is responsible for that goal. For the working groups, their topic is different, but each one has the same objective. They really need to understand how the topic is impacting the stakeholders, develop a set of considerations in different scenarios, and ultimately recommend a course of action to the crisis leadership team. So if that is the what, then the next step in the framework is the how. What are the processes they use to do that? Along the way, the crisis leadership team will be guiding, monitoring, supporting, advising these working committees, and ultimately they're going to be the ones that decide what to implement and how to do that. The working groups, again, their topics vary, but the process they're using is the same. The things that they're doing are the same. The first step is to brainstorm a set of questions. Now, using our example, the safety team, the health and safety team would want to brainstorm questions like, how are we going to monitor people for COVID symptoms? And what are we going to do if a student or a staff member tests positive? What's going to trigger a classroom needing to close, or a school needing to close, or the whole district needing to close again? The school operations logistics would be things like, how are we going to reasonably social distance in classrooms? And what about lunch? And what about getting kids to school and transportation? What are all the questions involved in that? So each team has a set of questions that they're going to need to answer for themselves, the what ifs, or how are we going tos. They answer those by gathering the experiences of the people that they are serving. So you'll want to talk to subject matter experts, you'll want to survey parents, and you'll want to consider special populations, vulnerable populations, marginalized populations, perhaps convening focus groups to see how these issues and your considerations might be impacting them uniquely. And then you'll make a map. You'll be considering a set of options. So maybe one option is we split kids in half and we have kids come on week A and other kids come on week B. Well, what would the answers to those questions be in that scenario? Or maybe it's we have some kids come Monday, Wednesday, and some kids come Tuesday, Thursday. What do the answers to all of our questions look like in that? Or maybe we are all virtual. Or maybe we're almost at the point where all kids can come back. So what do all of those questions look like? And they map that out, and then using the expertise that they've gathered, make recommendations to the crisis leadership team about which ones would be best for your system. Keep in mind that there are processes and tools that can be used to help with this shared decision making and consensus building. I assume that most of you have probably already seen the 7-point decision making continuum. There are other resources that the CalMI has for you. Some of them are in partnership with the Consortium for Educational Change. Some of them are in partnership with us at the NEA. We have our guidebook for collaboration that is included in the resources tab at the top of your screen, I believe, and on the website that we'll provide you at the end. So don't forget that along the way, there are tools to help you in the collaborative processes. And then finally, it's time to implement the plans. The crisis leadership team takes the recommendations from all of the working groups. And because they've been working independently, those plans may overlap or those plans may conflict. So the crisis leadership team needs to take a systems approach and look at everything and determine, does this make sense for us to implement, and how? How does that all synergize together? And then the job is not done just because the decision is made, right? The benefit to this is that you, along the way, have established the containers for collaboration that are at the ready for you to continue to use as the plans are implemented. So it'll be important to monitor how implementation is going and have the teams still in place so that they can help you course correct. Because we know that this is going to be messy, right? We've all been making decisions, and we're going to have to continue to make decisions very quickly with very little pilot testing, and we're not positive that things are going to go the way that we hope they will go. And plus, we're doing this in a pandemic, which is by its very nature a moving target. So because of all of that, it'll be really important to have those collaborative structures in place so that you can rely on them to make changes as needed and continue working together. I suspect that we will be in this act and implementation phase for the bulk of the next school year. That may vary. But at some point, we will get through this all, and we will be at a point where we can look backwards in addition to looking forwards. So when we're there, I will throw us back to Andrea for the reflect section. Oops. Okay. There.
School has reopened and meaningful learning is happening. Let's breathe. Yay, let's celebrate. Imagine school has reopened and meaningful learning is happening. Well, how do you know? Did you make a difference? And most importantly, to whom? Did you make a difference to those in your community that need change to happen? And what evidence do you see to indicate that you were successful? And this isn't done. What else needs to happen? How do you continue collaborative processes to continue a focus on student-centered outcomes? That's what this reflect part is about. After schools have reopened and the solutions that your teams have created have been implemented, it's important to go through a meaningful reflection process for continuous improvement. It's easy to get so involved in the day-to-day that we forget to do this. But school systems themselves should be learning and growing, and as any educator knows, reflection is a crucial step in that process. So it's important to have the space and make the time to reflect on questions like the ones that you see on the slides. So some of the working groups you may have created during this time may likely continue to exist, but their charge may shift from meeting the needs of the COVID crisis to improving upon whatever topic they're addressing, health and safety, for example, more broadly. It's likely that not every choice made will work equally well for all students in all schools. So it's important to examine these things and keep a collaborative structure there to work on them. But don't take my word for it. If our video works on the next slide, you will hear from a district superintendent and an officer of their local union who've been working collaboratively in similar ways as you all have, and put together a team to address some of the major issues during the crisis. And this is them reflecting upon that process while they're in it now.
I think that every principal that I've seen in the district has worked through some challenging scenarios and come out not only personally stronger, but their teams are stronger. And that has taken a lot of patience, not something that's happened overnight. And I can point out specific instances in each of the principals, whether it's during the shutdown or prior to that, where they've demonstrated a lot of growth. And being able to give them the latitude of trial and error is a great gift if you can give it. So that's some of my feedback.
Stepping into collaboration allows associations to do some real reflection about the priority things that need to be resolved. So when you do that, when you set a priority, then the other things aren't going to cloud the picture so much. Set a priority, go after one important thing, one thing that's meaningful to both sides of the fence. Rome wasn't built in a day. And I think that that's probably the lesson that we learned the most. You know, slow and steady is going to win this race. That doesn't seem like practical advice inside of a crisis like we're experiencing right now. However, I think most districts and most associations, if they could tackle one big problem and collaborate on a solution, like even tackling one big problem through collaborative structures would be, you know, a win-win all the way across the board.
So one thing that's important, Chip referenced earlier, the opportunity that this crisis moment yields. And it is a time, if you haven't started or if you already have started on the teams, to really look at engaging stakeholders in this important moment to co-create solutions. So much so that one superintendent remarked about their culture change over time, which is when he knew that change had happened in his district, it would be when somebody would come to him with a problem, and rather than figuring out what he needed to do to answer that problem or figuring out an answer to that problem, he immediately asked himself, do we have a committee for this issue? If so, let's give it to them. And if not, let's put a committee together to address it. That's culture change, and that's what we're talking about here. So to use this moment as a way to start or continue to build on your efforts and then grow them. We mentioned resources, and we have a lot. We are continuing to develop them. We have some e-learning on the horizon so that teams can kind of take some of the things that are in our toolkit and apply them together for shared learning. You can find them at the website here, but I also know that they are in your Cal LMI resource box as well. And feel free to contact us anytime. And I will turn it over to you, Glenn, for any questions that may have come up.
Well, thank you, Andrea, and thank you, Lee, and thank you, Chip, for a great presentation. There are a number of really interesting questions that are up in the chat, and I would encourage folks to continue to ask questions as we continue to probe this whole topic. One question that came up is specifically starts out with AB 77, which is a piece of legislation here in California, but I'll pose the question more broadly. Excuse me. Am I coming through okay? Okay, sorry. Getting a couple of different streams coming in here in my headset. But basically, I'll pose the question this way to you all. You know, as we look forward to the fall and implementing these plans, our district teams are faced with the pressures of needing to do more around the topics you brought forward, safely reopening our schools, but having to do so with less. How would you recommend that district teams confront that kind of basic dilemma of needing to move forward, but at the same time having fewer resources, and all of that in a very compressed timeline?
That is a tough one. Resources are important, and as Dr. Noguera said this morning, reflect where we hold our values. And so doing more with less is a phrase we kind of hate to use and hear, right? Because if not prioritizing education and the resources that students need to be successful, then what are we doing here? But you know, I think that educators are resourceful, uniquely resourceful, and we believe that when solutions to problems in communities are made closest to those communities, including the involvement of communities and access to the resources of communities, that greater outcomes can happen. So, you know, I think this is a moment to come together and tap into, be aware of what the resources are available in your community and maybe across communities to share some of the learnings and see what will work particularly for your own districts and schools. Other things to add, folks?
I would just add that the same collaborative structures that you've put together can be used to push up, and that can be used to reach down, right? So it can be very powerful for stakeholder collaborative teams to all go together as a unified entity to their states, to their members of Congress, and push for stimulus money and push for protected funds for education, pushing up. But then once you realize that your budgets are what they are and you have what you have, then those are the same structures that you'll use to reach down and pull solutions, as Andrea mentioned, and come up with the best solutions available to you with the resources you do have.
Great, thanks. Chip, are you still with us? Do you want to comment on that question at all?
Yeah, I just to say, to echo what everyone else said. I mean, it's a tough situation right now, and I think you know, if I could offer one word of advice, would be nimble. That's at this point in time probably the best advice I could give. But back to what I said in the beginning. This is a time. There are some opportunities here. I know it's tough, but I think there could be some transformational change that takes place down the road, which is why I'm so excited to work with the other organizations involved in this.
And we super appreciate all the advocacy work that y'all are doing at the national level as well. In California, we know we're going to be really looking forward to increased federal resources. Another question came up in terms of the cycle that you presented and then putting together collaborative teams around student voice. And questions, student voice is important. Our district is doing a good job with the process, but student voice is the one area that hasn't been well reflected. What advice would you provide to district teams around how best to incorporate student voice?
A lot of times we've seen examples who have incorporated student and parent voice has started at the school level. And so opening up the doors in schools to some of the processes that are collaborative, so school leadership or school learning teams, invite them in, show them what it's all about, remove the mystery from the processes. And then when they understand that, also invite them into the district leadership or district learning teams. If you show this in a transparent way, they understand it and will advocate like hell to keep it in place. We had one person tell us, when there is this much space, if you can see my hands, between educators and parents and community, we can't lose on anything. And so, how to incorporate them in when things are going well for the solution building is really critical. And students are right there, right? They know what's going on. I have a 16-year-old and a 14-year-old. And so, when they're on TikTok, they see, I'm thinking, oh my God, I have to tell them all of the things that are going on in this nation right now. They know it before we do. And in many ways, they're impacting change. And so I would say, don't underestimate them. Find the spaces that already exist to invite in students and parents authentically. And if there aren't those spaces available, create new ones.
Thanks, Andrea.
Hey, this is Chip.
Lee,
Could
did
I
you have
jump
anything?
in and just add one thing? Again,
Absolutely.
I agree with everything that was just said. But I would also add on that districts that have done really well with innovation and planning have generally included students as part of their planning process. And so they bring a lot of fresh perspective and ideas to I think what's going forward, particularly as districts may look at more personalized learning, which in of itself is a way to have student voice in each individual student's learning.
Thanks, Chip. Lee, were you also going to add something?
Sure. I think older students can be included in the collaborative committees, the working groups that you establish. For younger students, practically the best place to include them is probably in when teams are trying to diagnose how the issues impact the communities and the students. And so to have questions on parent surveys that are intended for parents and children to fill out together and make sure that there are opportunities there. Another possibility at the school level especially is to include students in focus groups and to have meaningful ways to ask students' opinions on the issues that school leadership teams are considering.
Yeah, and maybe you develop a TikTok outreach arm to really get people involved.
Sure.
So, and just thinking about adding student voice and the district teams, there was a question that came in from Michelle around how large a team should be. And I'm thinking about the chart that you presented, Lee, with the different committees. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that essential balance between wanting to have a team that really cements you in the community and brings in the kind of input and develops the solid base that you need, but yet also maybe small enough from an organizing standpoint that you can move and make decisions and get things done. Can you maybe comment a little bit on that tension? And again, the base question is, how large should a team be?
Right. I mean, that is a great question, and it's not one that has a set answer, right? I mean, how big is your table, right? I mean, that's certainly a question um, that people have, and it's a balance. We've seen teams that are very, very small, so working groups that are maybe only 3 people, but then you ask yourself, do you have enough people there that you need to really thoughtfully consider all of the perspectives that you need to consider? And so chances are that in order to do that, you would want a team that's a little bit larger than that. There's definitely not a set number on that. Depending on what the problem is, you may even need a third level, right? You have a working group that is a large group, and then subgroups working on individual tasks that are even smaller than that. And so it just really varies on the size of your district, the size of the problems you're tackling, and the number of stakeholders that you feel are really crucial to have those perspectives as you consider the work that you're doing.
Thanks.
I'll just add that we've seen some districts and schools say whoever wants to join, and they might expand and contract based on what's going on at the time. But what those areas have found that have been inclusive, they found those new to the profession clamoring to join and be part of a working committee or be part of a district team, in ways that create a culture of empowerment and voice that you only hope exists in other places. And so creating that welcoming environment is really important for those new. And then the other piece is really asking from a equity lens, whose voices are not in the room that need to be included. And that's really important when determining the composition.
Yeah, but it's not only how large, but who is represented at the table. That is really important. That's really critical. Chip, any comments on this question around how large a team should be?
I'm sorry, could you repeat? I couldn't hear you. I just heard my name.
The question, Chip, is around, basically, if you're starting out and you're putting together a team, how large do you think it should be? How large should it be? Trying to address the balance of getting stuff done with representation, and then Andrea just brought up a really good point around equity and diversity and inclusion at the table as well.
Right. Yeah, no, I heard Andrew's point, which was a good one. I mean, I think it depends on a lot of things. I have to put on a lawyer hat with that famous "it depends" answer. But in part, I think it needs to reflect all of the audiences. So yeah, I would say at least one representative representing sort of each key viewpoint. But also it depends somewhat on the size of the school district and the schools, how big they get. You don't want it to be unwieldy. I think you almost need like a kitchen cabinet type group to do the bulk of the work, and then you can expand it to a bigger group as you go forward and say, here's where we're thinking right now, and get more feedback that way. But again, I think it varies depending on the specific characteristics of the district. You need to come up with something that works individually best for each district.
Gotcha. Thanks. It's another great question kind of about where to begin. And I've been involved in labor management collaboration efforts in California for quite a while as a parent, as a school board member, as chief deputy at the California Department of Education. And I think the counsel that we've typically provided in the past is, don't wait for a crisis. Do something, get started, and get some easy wins first, and then build up to the more difficult issues. Obviously, right now we don't have that luxury. We're in a crisis situation, maybe multiple crises happening at the same time. So, given that, and given the prepare, reflect, act framework that you've provided for us, which I think is a really excellent way to kind of divide up thinking about how to phase and do this kind of work. If a team is starting right now, it's summer 2020, getting ready for reopening, where would you recommend they begin in that framework that you've outlined for us? And I'll kick that to you first, Andrea.
Okay, so you have to clarify what is your goal here. And in this presentation, it was the safe reopening of school buildings, right? Does that need to be modified based on where we are? Does that do you add meaningful learning in there as well? And then you think through, what are the major issues in my community that need to be addressed immediately? So you can kind of go hierarchy of needs first, or you could go, where is the coalition of the willing and what can we get done quickly? I would say some sort of needs assessment, taking stock in the community on what are the most important issues is going to be really important. The document that we put forth if you take a look at it further, has a whole bunch of questions to consider in those big buckets that Lee presented. So that might be a place that you start to say, out of all of these issues, which ones are of highest priority for our community, and do we have a team that can address those? So you can see that in the resource piece.
Great. Thanks, Andrea. Lee, what would be your counsel for districts in terms of where they should begin?
Very similar. I think some of it depends on the relationships that have already been established thus far, certainly between union and administration, but also with the other education stakeholders and community partners that you may want to bring in. If you have a long history of working together and collaboration, that puts you in a different starting place, because as you think of going through the 3 stages, the prepare stage, you don't have to make the case for collaboration. You've already done that work because of a history of having done that. And so it pushes you along a little bit. Whereas if you don't have that history of a working relationship, then you may be starting with, well, why should we share in decision making on this or any other issue? From a superintendent's point, why shouldn't my central office be the ones making all of these decisions unilaterally? These decisions are mine, these other decisions are the unions, and vice versa for the union. So it really depends on to what extent those relationships have been established as to how long you're going to spend in the prepare stage. And I'd argue that by virtue of being here, there are at least some signs that most of the people that are probably watching this presentation are not starting from square one. So in a crisis, you have some background and some history that you can fall back on that I think is going to put you in a good place.
Thanks, Lee. And Chip, wanted to maybe take a little bit of a different spin on this with you, as I'll ask this as a former school board member myself. Where would you recommend that school board members begin or enter into this process?
Well, school board members play a very important role, obviously. They're the ones that ultimately have the final oversight for their districts. They approve the budget. They're responsible for all of that. At the same time, they need to be involved in the overarching decisions. School board members don't, I think, have the time to be involved in every day-to-day issue. That's really what you need, your superintendent and the administration to sort of take the lead on. So I think school board members need to recognize what their role is. Their role is to make sure there's an overall big picture, a goal for the district, that there's a good plan in place. They need to know where things stand in the timeline. They need to know how the funds are being spent, and they need to be, of course, fully transparent with the public who elect them in those cases to their office. So I think that's sort of is what the role should be. And in terms of where to start, there's a lot of places where to start. My previous gig was at the Alliance for Excellent Education, and they have a great. Okay, I was just going to say, Future Ready Schools is a good place to go look. They have great resources for school leaders, including school board members.
Great. So I just want to thank Andrea and Lee and Chip from the National Labor Management Partnership, from NEA and NSBA for these great tools and resources. Really have enjoyed this conversation today. And as has been mentioned multiple times, the resources are up available as part of the swap card agenda resource. So take a look at the resource library and take a look at those. I think you'll find them very, very useful. We're taking a little bit of a break now for lunch, so everyone should go ahead and do that, have some lunch, and then we'll be back at 12:45 with our role-alike sessions. I think we can probably take another minute or so for some just quick closing comments. I'm wondering, Andrea, Lee, and Chip, if there's anything that you'd like to just kind of sum up with in terms of closing out this session today.
I thank you for having us here and spend this time with you. I will say I've been at the NEA for quite some time, not going to say how many years, but it's been a little while. And by far, getting to participate in the labor management collaboration practice and learning and doing this work has been the most exciting work. And I'm so thrilled to watch you guys and help support in any way we can. So we'll be watching. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Lee?
I would just concur with that and also say that we are interested to continue the conversation. And so we do encourage you to check out our website. In addition to the resources there, there's also opportunities there to let us know what you're doing with collaboration and how all of this goes. And certainly we would love to hear your stories.
Thanks, Lee. And Chip, any final comments?
Yes, just once again, thank you for the opportunity. I'll echo the other comments. We're very happy to be part of the collaboration, and we work regularly not only in these issues, but we work with NEA and the other organizations on advocacy issues related to making sure you get the resources you need every day, every minute of the day. And please contact your members of Congress and let them know the challenges you're having. It's going to be very important to us moving the national agenda so that you do have the resources you're going to need to reopen in the fall.
Thanks, Chip, and thanks again to all of you for all of your work, and in particular that national advocacy, so vital for us all right now. So with that, this session is adjourned. Thank you all very much. We'll see you all in the role-alike sessions starting at 12:45. Have a great lunch.
Thank you.